Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Stedman podcast. Hopefully, you've been enjoying this series of exercising our faith that I've been doing with my congregation here at the First Church of God in Stanton. Today, we're going to be talking about the discipline of service, and joining me on this podcast is Josh Jamison. He is the gardens manager over at the Heart Village over in Lake Wales, Florida. He does a lot of cool ministries by helping people be prepared to do missions work overseas. He also does a lot of agricultural and looking at different ways to kind of help grow food to be able to help serve not only his community in Lake Wales, but even to train others on how they can grow food overseas. So, Josh, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
So, Josh, tell us a little bit about what it is that you do.
For the last 8 years or so, I've worked at a place that's in Florida called Heart Village. And HEART is an acronym that stands for Hunger, Education, and Resources Training. And it's a facility where students come and they stay for either typically for 15 weeks or for 3 weeks or up sometimes even shorter. And it's an immersive experience for them to learn about what it means to do global service work typically amongst the poor in the developing world. So places like Africa, Southeast Asia, Central America. So our students may be going on to be missionaries or do something like Peace Corps. And then some of them end up even doing community development-based projects in the United States or all kinds of interesting things.
Okay, so when you say students, are we talking about college age students, or can this be like high school students?
Um,
Like who are like your target audience?
yeah, so I would say most of them are college students, but anybody can come here, and we've had students as old as 55 or so. Last term we had a pastor come train from Zambia, and he was 50 some. So we also, like, a lot of our training is agricultural skills in plants and animals, and other community development skills such as basic village health care, nutritional education, appropriate technology, things like purifying water. So basically, we hope a student graduates from the program having at least a cursory knowledge of all those different things. And if they go to serve in a remote community in the developing world, they at least have a basic skill set to make an impact wherever it is that they go.
Good, good. So when we talk about kind of this idea of the discipline of service, we see a lot of times in a traditional American church setting, service is usually about um, kind of helping in food pantries or maybe going to serve soup at a soup kitchen or helping the poor. So why is this such an important discipline for a Christian and for the church at large?
Um, well, to me, um, when you read through the Gospels and you look at Jesus' life, so much of what he does is service to others. And his, greatest command is to love God and to love others as ourselves. So in trying to emulate Christ, the most basic way we see him living out his love on earth is to love other people. And so um, it's a crucial practice of the Christian faith and many other faiths, but a crucial practice of the Christian faith to humble ourselves and to put others before ourselves and to do whatever we can in service of others. And I'm certainly not always the best at that, but that's the goal.
Okay. Yeah, and you kind of mentioned, even at the end, like, I mean, I'm not the best at that, which, I think a lot of cases when we think about the idea of Christian service or just service in general, especially you mentioned that, in other religions, that's crucial to, one's practice of their faith. I think when it comes to service, sometimes I think that we can very easily miss the mark in some cases, or in other times we can make service about other things
Mm.
except on what it actually is supposed to be. And I think for an example, I can think about, there'd be times where, especially in my youth, Because again, I'm an old man now.
Yeah.
So, but even in my youth, I could think about, well, I'm going to serve in this ministry, or I'm going to go to this, I'm going to go help out at this food pantry because I have nothing better to do. And that's kind of
Hmm.
the attitude where, for Jesus, when I read the Gospels for Jesus, it wasn't just like, well, it was convenient for him. Sometimes there's times where it was inconvenient. The time when he's ready to get on the boat and he turned around and he saw the great crowd with bringing all their sick and people who needed help. And he said that he was moved with compassion and he basically went and helped them. So I think, when we talk about, not being the best, what are some of the challenges that maybe you have experienced yourselves or you have seen others experience when it comes to trying to serve gospel in a gospel sense, but what are some of the shortcomings that comes to service?
Well, since I work in mostly in educational capacity, um, I think my constant struggle and my constant way I'm trying to recenter myself um, is trying to remove my sense of um, my sense of superiority, in that I think that I have something great to share with somebody else and that they have nothing back to offer.
Hmm.
And in a in a developing world setting, oftentimes people that are trained in a Western country think that all of their knowledge is superior and that everybody should just listen to them. And in reality, in any setting um, where there's two people involved, both people bring a great wealth of knowledge and their own individual experiences and context. Um, and so the something that I'm always trying to recenter on is that both both people are coming to the table with an equally valid, um, an equally valid perspective, and that any type of educational experience should always be a two-way thing where it's a mutual exchange instead of a top-down dynamic. And I think for Americans, it's really hard because we think of ourselves, we have a very fixing everything type mentality. If you put out some kind of problem out in the air, people are very quick to think that they can just think their way out of it, not acknowledging that oftentimes in the developing world, situations are really quite complex. If um, people are dying of waterborne illness or something like that, there's all these compounding factors that make that situation a lot more complicated. And local people are very knowledgeable about their own situation and the topic at hand. And yeah, to me, that's the biggest struggle is humbling myself, not trying to consider myself, as the lowest, and always trying to approach everything with a learning mentality instead of a teaching and telling mentality. A lot of this thinking, I've been greatly influenced by the writing of Paulo Freire in my thinking about these things. So maybe an interesting read for anybody interested.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're really hitting the nail on the head here because you're looking at that top down mentality or even kind of a left right mentality where it's like, there's where I think from a Western society, it's like, well, we have the education, we have the tools, we may have the money, we may have the power, so we can kind of solve your problems. But I like kind of this idea of, it's a more of a unity. Service is more about unity of
Mm-hmm.
joining together to coming down to humble yourselves, even if you have a superior knowledge or superior wisdom,
Yeah,
well, you have to learn from their perspective because these are the people you're trying to help. And if you come in saying, well, this is the way you're going to do it, and it doesn't mesh with maybe their cultural ideas or maybe with the education on how to operate certain things or how to do certain things, then it ends up falling apart very quickly once, the educated kind of make their way back home and, then they're stuck with trying to understand something that they don't quite get. Is that a fair assessment to kind of think
sure.
about?
And also, I think sometimes service can look like letting other people teach you something or share something with you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think about, when Jesus was washing his disciples' feet, he basically said, "I have done this, so you must wash one another's feet." And even if we take that from an ideological point of view, and I don't even know if I said the correct word there, but the idea that different personalities, different backgrounds, different cultures, but they are still serving, so you could always learn from one another to again go to the goal, which is to love God and to love others, which seems to be the highest goal. So when I think about, you talked a little bit about your at heart, how you do a lot of stuff like agricultural stuff, or even trying to figure out like how to get clean water to places. What are some examples where you have learned from others to kind of help you, not only train, but even maybe do some stuff from your own benefit of just kind of learning on like different food sources or different
Mhm.
plants or any of that stuff?
Well, I think my most transformational experiences of learning have been from people in rural developing countries, in Central America or whatever, is going out into those communities and actually dialoguing with farmers. Um, for me, that's more so than any other kind of education I've ever received. Um, and it does, yeah, that does just a lot to break down this hubris of thinking that Americans are so, much more knowledgeable. When you actually go out and spend time with farmers, you learn an incredible amount. And spending time with those people has helped me pick up a lot of things that I can teach to students that may be going to different contexts. Um, so yeah, I think that's who I've learned the most from.
Yeah. What is a project that you have worked on or are currently working on that you're finding great value to kind of help serve others?
Hmm. Well, there's a few things. So one is we've done these raised vegetable gardens for a lot of years, and a couple of years, year or two ago, we made some major changes and installed these new gardens. Um, and I've started to really intensify and dial down on a lot of different, really specific kinds of practices that can intensify and increase the amount of food that comes out of the ground per square foot. And a lot of the students have been able to work in that. And I think more than anything, even more always, I think more than learning any specific technique is turning on a light bulb in somebody's mind and realizing the great potential of what exists, um, the great capacity of nature um, to give us food and all the things that we need. um, and for a lot of students, I think working in those garden beds and on the farm, um, and just for the first time in your life, bringing in big, heavy crates of food day in and day out, on a really small space. People get to catch a glimpse of what the world could be like, to where everybody in the world has what they need.
Yeah, and especially when you think about food and how even I don't know what the statistics are, so maybe you might know like how many people have like inadequate food or inadequate nutrition, not only worldwide but even just within our own within our own nation. The numbers are
Yeah.
sometimes staggering. So the fact that you're saying you're able to produce a lot of food from such small spaces, I think that's kind of a game changer. And you also said something else about, just when you get people who are playing, I guess playing wouldn't be the correct word, but who are working with the dirt, working within nature, and really seeing like, oh, look at all the cool stuff we can do that's just kind of naturally happening. Like you don't really need a lot of high tech tools or equipment to be able to produce a lot of food. Like,
Hmm.
just the earth that we have can do a lot of great things if you can tap into the potential and the stuff that we already have, the resources that we already have available to us.
Yeah. And part of well, yeah, I'm not, it's hard to keep track of hunger statistics because there's so many different definitions at play. And but The answer is that there's a lot of people that don't have enough food. And if, in fact, a lot of our vision of what malnutrition or hunger is sometimes a little skewed, because a lot of us have seen the images of maybe the famines of Ethiopia, where you have a child, there's that famous picture where there's the child and there's the vulture sitting off in the background with this child that's withered away. And that's a result of somebody just not eating anything for a long period of time, which does happen. But the much more expansive situation is that people are actually filling their bellies 3 times a day with calorie foods, but they're not getting everything they need in terms of vitamins and minerals and protein and fats. So that adds up and begins to affect the body in a lot of ways that are maybe hard to see from the outside. Things like stunting of growth. So like I know in Guatemala specifically, it's about 50% of children are not at the height that they should be at age 5 or so. They're 6 inches shorter than they should be, just from prolonged lack of access to adequate nutrition. Another huge one is vitamin A. So it's something between 250 and 500,000 children go blind every year around the world from lack of access to vitamin A. And ultimately, I think about half of those end up dying because a lack of vitamin A ultimately kills you. A lack of any vitamin or mineral ultimately destroys the body. It makes you more susceptible. These things are compounding, because if you're, say, lacking calcium, you're lacking iron, you're lacking protein, it makes you more susceptible to dying of waterborne illnesses, to dying of malaria, to all the other things that people are exposed in these settings. So a framework for creating health is looking at that. And since you're mentioning the statistics, something that I've been really reflecting on is how the whole world has kind of come to a stop because of coronavirus, which is probably for the best, because we're seeing that this is killing people, and we can take simple steps to stop people from dying. What's really sad is for me to realize that if you take something like lack of access to clean water, malnutrition, dengue fever, malaria, these kind of things that silently kill people all throughout the developing world, the number of people that die of those kinds of things will greatly supersede the amount of people that are going to die from coronavirus. But because these people are on the edges of society, they kind of die quietly, and in the really remote corners of the world, it's hard to get the political will and to get people motivated to care about those people's lives. So, this is turning into a bit of a rant, but I guess part of the program here is getting people to recognize those issues and to take them very seriously, and realize that we can do a little bit to resolve that situation. We, in our limited capacity, everything we do, we have to trust adds up to something good that helps to address that situation.
Yeah, and I think you're right on the money there, because I think that with time and resources that we as Americans have, we have the opportunity to be able to even if we can't be out there boots to the ground, we can always try to be knowledgeable about what resources are out there, or how we can even give, or how can we help in those endeavors. And I think when it comes back to I think a lot of times when it comes back to service, even when Jesus sent out the 12, he told them, don't take a bunch of stuff with you. Just go and rely on the hospitality of others who want to hear the gospel message. And I think to see that in a modern sense, it's just like any little bit we can do, or even just the way of raising awareness for ourselves, to just say, okay, this is an issue, this is a problem, what can I do to kind of help? I think that kind of gets into a mindset of really being in service. If I can go over there and help people, great. If I can go to a heart institute and really train myself so I know have the basics on what I can do and to go over and help, fantastic. Or even if for some reason I can't do it, are there other resources that I have that I can go and still make a difference in our world? Um, and I
And,
think that's always great to kind of see that. So to tie that in, like, what are some good resources that you can give to people, whether it's books? I know you mentioned an author you're reading, and even just like information
uh-huh.
about your own organization on what people can do to kind of help, or even find stuff that they can go use to serve.
Yeah. There's all kinds of resources out there of varying degrees of all kinds of different opinions. One book that's been very formational for me is called 2 Ears of Corn by Roland Bunch. It's kind of specifically geared towards agricultural development, but really draws on that whole mentality of approaching service as a learner and honoring the great depth of each person that you encounter. Um, there's going and talking to people that I think is the best way to learn. But something I did want to share is that something kind of related to what you were saying is that something I think that's really powerful about Heart, about our program, is that maybe a precondition to serving is trying to understand the conditions that somebody comes from. In order to serve, you have to be compelled to do it. And yeah, something I think that's really powerful about Heart is that it takes people who, like me, grew up in some random, well-off situation in Northeast Ohio, and puts you out in a really remote situation with the simulated conditions of not having electricity and those kinds of things for a few months, and learning what it's like to take care of a small farm for sustenance with hand tools, to be out there in the heat of the day, swinging a machete, getting bit by the fire ants, getting eaten by the mosquitoes, feeling like you're having a heat stroke. Um, all of those things are a daily experience of farmers around the world and people that don't have a choice but to live out that reality. That's what they have to do for survival. And by immersing ourselves in that experience, um, you cannot understand what it's like to be a rural farmer in Zambia, but you get a taste of what it's like to do that work. You get a taste of what it's like when we cook our food over a fire, like half of the world still does. You get a taste of that. And for a lot of people, that taste of what it's like to live life that way is a really powerful motivator to go on to do service, because when you start to see, wow, after 2 hours of working out on the farm, I feel physically exhausted. I want to go shower and go back into the air conditioning, and realizing that this is the daily reality of people that go back to houses that don't have showers, that don't have air conditioning, people that if they get hurt on the field, they don't have access to medical care. They're already predisposed to diseases. They already may be working under a condition where they're malnourished. All those things spur people on once you've experienced that, and whether or not that motivates you to go serve in the developing world or not, it at least informs you a little bit of how can I donate, or how can I be praying for other people. And if anything, you've come a little bit closer to the experience of the poor. And I think Jesus' whole scope of his life on earth is he became incarnate. He set aside his power of being God to enter the experience of being a human, and that was his act of service to us. So our act of service is, as much as we can, incarnate ourselves in the lives of the people that we want to serve, and through that sort of incarnation, we come to understand their situation, and it informs us of how we can serve them better.
All right, that's very good stuff, Josh. Thank you for sharing that. Do you have a website to the Heart Institute?
Yeah, heartvillage.org. And there's YouTube
Heartvillage.org.
videos and other things.
Okay, awesome. Well, Josh, thank you so much for sharing your time and sharing your wisdom with us. I definitely have learned a lot just from this moment of talking to you, and I'm sure everyone else who will be listening to this podcast will gain a lot from your wisdom. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks. Talk to you
Yep.
later.
And guys, thank you so much for listening. Hopefully, you have enjoyed this podcast. Again, you can listen to this podcast on all the different sites: Apple Music, Spotify, anywhere you can listen to a podcast, you can find it. You can also find us on my personal page on YouTube and even my website, thescottstedman.com. And again, you can find all the information that Josh was talking about at heartvillage.org. And again, Josh, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks.
And everyone, hopefully you have a great day, and thanks for listening, and I'll be back soon. Take care. Bye.